try this out. Can you hear me, or would you prefer? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So without a mic, it's because this is meant to be anyway a more informal gathering. So mics are not welcome. So good morning to everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Nada Pretner, and I'm active in the movement for the Palestinian rights, BDS Slovenia. And today I will be chairing this meeting, which is a tribute to Jaffa, the city and its industry, citrus industry. So before I give a couple of announcements, because as usual there are always some minor changes in this kind of cases, I would first like to extend my thanks to the distinguished guests we have this morning with us, and also to the museum, the Ethnographic Museum of Slovenia, who is hosting us on its premises, and of course to our speakers who accepted graciously to come and talk today. And also I would like to extend my personal thanks to two people who are here in this room. One is Mr. Adli Masud-Erhali. Without him, I think this exhibition would not be here today. He has been extremely generous in giving us material, books, contacts, great encouragement. Do your work properly, he said. And so that's what we tried to do. And so thank you very much, Mr. Erhali. And the other one is my friend Marta Cossettini, who I know does not like to be publicly thanked. But on the other hand, she also helped enormously with everything that has to do with graphic design, videos. It's all her work. And also she has been constantly my right hand in also pushing me forward. So thank you very much. So having said this, let's see the changes to the program, very minor ones. But Raed Duzdar, the director, was not given a visa on time. So unfortunately, he is not with us. This is the bad news. The good news is that Dima Abdul Rahim, who also cannot come, but did send us a video of presentation. Okay? So we will be listening to her side of the story in the second part of this morning. So, what will happen now is, first of all, Barbara Vodopivec, who is my colleague from BDS Slovenia, will shortly introduce us who we are. And after that, we will start with the first part of the morning session. We will have Sami Abu Shehadeh giving us a historical outline, is that correct? Then followed by Daniel Monterescu, who will be a bit more specific on the subject. And then we will open the floor to questions, after which hopefully there will be a short coffee break. And after that we will dedicate the second part, which might be a little bit shorter than the first one, to the connection between the Abdul Rahim family and Slovenia, which lasted 50 years, which is not a short time. Okay? And then we will have a light refreshment and a private viewing of the exhibition. So we can begin.
Good morning, and thank you all for coming today. As Nada mentioned, my name is Barbara Vodopivec. I'm a member of Slovenian Movement for Palestine, working under BDS campaign. BDS is a worldwide campaign initiated by Palestinian civil society in 2005, calling for boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel until it complies with international law and human rights. I will not talk a lot about BDS. For those interested, please do check our website or International BDS Movement website. There's maybe just one point I would like to underline. In the last years, we have seen the efforts of criminalization of BDS, not just in Israel, but also in Europe. Activists being arrested in France. Efforts like that are seen in the UK. Rumors about it also in Italy. And I think what is important to emphasize is that BDS is a non-violent, human rights-based movement fighting against all forms of discrimination. It is based on anti-apartheid movement against apartheid in South Africa. And I think this is important to remember because criminalization of BDS takes away the legitimacy and the rights of the Palestinian struggle. In Slovenia, we started with the Slovenian Movement for Palestine. We started in 2011. We are a movement, we are not an NGO or any other form of organization. In these 5 years, we have worked on several boycott campaigns, mainly against agricultural products coming from illegal settlements, among which is often Jaffa the Orange. We work a lot on advocacy on national and European level, and we work a lot on awareness-raising activities. We feel that it is really important to open space in Slovenia for Palestinian voice and Palestinian narrative, because although we do probably hear quite a lot about Palestine, we still know very little. The event today, the idea for this event started already 2 years ago, and I'm very happy to finally see it come to life. I would like to thank Nada Pretner, because she really did most of the work, or she did all the work when it comes to the exhibition, organizing this event, doing all the research, and without her this event wouldn't take place. The aim of the photographic exhibition is to show how Jaffa the Orange and Jaffa the city was transformed from the symbol of Palestinian prosperity and pride to the symbol of loss of homeland, Israeli occupation, and also the struggle against Israeli occupation. The discussion today will give a broader historical and present perspective of Jaffa the Orange, of Jaffa the city and its orange industry. But I think what's also really important about the exhibition and the event today is that we will also talk about these collaborations, personal collaborations and friendships that have developed beyond political realms and also beyond borders, which probably today is more important than ever. The event today is also part of the global commemoration of 68th anniversary of Nakba, or catastrophe, which marked the expulsion of more than 700,000 Palestinians from their homes after the creation of Israel in 1948. And when we talk about Nakba today, or when we talk about displacement of Palestinians, I think it's important to bear in mind that it's not just a memory, it's not a moment in history, that it's still quite a lived reality for many Palestinians today, whether we talk about daily demolitions of homes, loss of land, and if we look at how many people fled during Nakba to Syria, and how many again have to flee again. I think it's important to bear in mind that this is an ongoing reality. So I hope we will hear a lot of interesting things today. I really thank again everybody for coming. And yes, let's hear what our guests have to say. So thanks again.
Thank you.
So our first speaker is Sami Abu Shahada. For those who do not know Sami, but I think many do, he is a long-term activist in the Jaffa Popular Committee for the Defense of Land and Housing Rights. But Sami is also a historian and completing his PhD at the Tel Aviv University on the topic of Jaffa as the center of Arab culture during the Mandate period. If there's anything else you would like to add about yourself, you're free to do so. Okay, your turn.
Should I start?
Yes, you have 25 minutes.
Good, 25 minutes. Good morning, first of all. It's, I feel great pleasure and honor to be with you today in this nice warm room and to see people who still think and care about one of the most important human cases, I think, in the 20th century, the Palestinian case. We're not talking in general about the Palestinian issue, we're talking specifically about the city of Jaffa. But the way I see it, the way I think about this issue, I see the relationship between Jaffa and Tel Aviv, the history of these two cities, and the relationship between them as a microcosm of the whole Israel-Palestinian conflict. I think that the story of the Palestinian Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe, is the story of the city of Jaffa. So I see the two things connected. And first of all, I would like to thank Nada and all the activists, the great activists that are doing great work in Slovenia and in general. I know that it's not easy to give your time, part part of you are giving their lives much more than their time for peace and justice in Palestine. And this is not something easy with all the, surely not the people who are activists in the BDS in the last few years, because everybody has probably noticed that Israel saw the danger when you are talking about the human rights as opposing the Zionist project. So now they are fighting back, and they are doing really hard life for all the activists in France, in Germany, and in other parts of the world. So it's a great pleasure to be with you, and I know that it's not easy to do what you are doing. So thank you for asking us to come here. And in my talk, I would like to describe a little bit the change that happened in the most important Arab-Palestinian city before the war of 1948 and the establishment of Israel, the city of Jaffa. We say in Arabic Jaffa, in English it's Jaffa. It's the same place. If you hear me using both words, Jaffa and Jaffa are the same place. And I want to talk about the change that happened for this city that was the most important Arab-Palestinian city before the war. When I say most important, not because we are more important than Jerusalem and religiously. Okay? This is the way people who were living in Jaffa before the war of 1948 and the city planners thought about the place. They saw Jaffa as the most important because it was the biggest Arab-Palestinian city demographically. Now it's hard to imagine this after the expulsion and the destruction of the city. And it was the most important economic city, mainly because of oranges. Oranges was the leading product of that city at that time. And it was the most important Arab cultural center. All the important daily newspapers, cinema houses, theaters, all the modern cultural life, what is usually described as modernization, happening in different parts of the world. Jaffa was the leading city in Palestine before the war of 1948. But as a result of the war, and a little bit after the war, this very important city was transferred into a small, destroyed, poor criminal neighborhood. Okay, I want to describe for you the process, what happened that made this huge change between the most important Palestinian city to something totally marginal. Now, it's easier to describe the geography for Slovenians because more or less Slovenia is as big as historical Palestine. And you have also small cities. Okay, you don't have things like London. Same we have in Palestine. Okay, it's a small state with small cities. Jaffa at its peak had something like 120,000 people. And it was one of the most important cities for a lot of reasons, not just oranges. Oranges is the most famous thing. Everybody is teaching history of branding. Jaffa orange was the most famous brand in the whole world for something like a century. Since second half of the 19th century till the end of the first half of the 20th century, for something like a century, Jaffa orange was the most famous product all over the world. It was very known that in places like Britain or Scotland, that the best present someone can get on Christmas was the Jaffa orange. It was something quite big ones. Now, why the oranges of Jaffa and not the oranges of other places? Palestinians did not invent oranges. There were oranges all over the world. There were oranges in Spain, in Portugal, in California. What happens, we really don't know exactly how, by the way. At the beginning of the 19th century, new kind of an orange developed in the area that was called Jaffa. Till the 19th century, oranges that were well known all over the world were oranges with the thin cover. These old kind of oranges are also good and tasty and everything, but you can't export them for long distances. You cannot hold in the ship for a long time. The huge change happened with a new kind of an orange, what we call the Shamuti orange. The Shamuti is the orange with the thick cover. This new orange that we fight with the Zionists who developed this orange, by the way. It seems to be it was neither the Palestinians nor the Zionists. Probably it was a biological mutation or something. But we had a new kind of an orange with the thick cover, the Shamuti. This solved the problem of exporting oranges to wherever you like in the world. This orange could hold inside the ships for a few months and it will not be damaged. This allowed the Jaffans to start exporting oranges not only to Istanbul and Alexandria, which were very close to Jaffa and they could do that for a long time. They started being able to export oranges to Europe and to America. So the same box of orange that would bring you X amount of money before the Shammuti, and you can send it to close areas in the Middle East, the same box will bring you 10 times the money if you will sell it to Europe. This made a huge change in the development of the history of Jaffa. Anyone who had some money at that time decided to invest in the orange agriculture and industry. Okay. This is where the Rahim family also got into the story, and they started also importing wood, because you needed a lot of things in order to help the development of the orange thing. This thing made Jaffa a very famous city in the area of the Middle East. Palestine, geographically, is in the heart of the Arab East. We have the Egyptians in the south, Syrians and Lebanese in the north. We are close to Jordan. So people heard that Jaffa is doing very good economically, and a lot of migrant workers started coming to Jaffa in the 19th century, since the second half. People came to work in Jaffa from Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Morocco, Algeria, and Afghanistan. This is why we have a lot of family names in Jaffa that are called Al-Masri, the Egyptian, and they are not relatives because they came from Egypt, or Al-Mughrabi, or Afghani, all different kinds of names that they serve the place that the people came. Professor Kimmerling tells us that at the end of the 19th century, Jaffa is a seaport. Jaffa's port was working more than all the ports of Lebanon together. Sur, Sidon's, and Beirut's ports were not working at that time as much as Jaffa's port. This development helped the city to demographically grow very fast, and then to become a very important economic center, and then also a cultural center. Now, oranges was the leading product, but Palestinians from Jaffa were exporting all different kinds of agricultural products. Red melons, big amounts for Egypt and other places of the world, sesame, wheat, a lot of things. And it was the main seaport for all the central area of Palestine. All the important cities like Lod, Ramle, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Hebron, used to export and import everything through Jaffa's port. So a very good income came through the taxes of Jaffa's port. Another good income was by tourism. The 19th century, something important happened in the world, the invention of the steam motor ships. Now, this also brought to us tourism, modern tourism, the way we knew it. Modern tourism started mainly by Christian pilgrimage, people coming from Europe to visit the Holy Land. This brought a huge amount of tourism also to the city of Jaffa, because Jaffa is one of the holy places for the Christians. Because after a very big miracle that happened with St. Peter in the city, so at the end of the 19th century, the 1880s, when the number of population in Jaffa was something like 40,000 people, they used to host every year something like 80,000 Christian pilgrims, double the number of the population. So also tourism was a very good income to the city, and there was middle kind of industry. So there were a few pillars that helped the city of Jaffa to develop to be such an important city in modern history of Palestine. We had agriculture, very developed agriculture, led mainly by the orange product. And we had tourism, and we had some industry, and the seaport was bringing a lot of money. This is why when the Zionist project came to Palestine, most of its important parts, most of its first colonies were surrounding the city of Jaffa. It's not a miracle that Tel Aviv is so close to the city of Jaffa. When they came to Palestine, they looked for a very good city center where they can develop their project. So when they came, they settled first of all in Jaffa. Then all the important Zionist colonies, like what later on developed to be Tel Aviv, or Rishon LeZion, or Holon, or Beit Vegan, that later on became the city of Bat Yam, were all surrounding the city of Jaffa. More than 50% of the Zionist colonizers to Palestine, the end of the 19th century till 1948, were at the periphery of the big Arab city of Jaffa. Now, till the First World War, the Zionist project, the settler colonial Zionist project, was totally a big failure. Most of them were leaving again. in numbers, they were totally marginal. This is why the Palestinian society did not deal with them as great danger or a big enemy, because they alone were leaving the place. People that came from Poland or Russia or different parts of Europe to colonize Palestine did not like neither the climate, nor the food, or the population. They did not feel at home, and they were leaving back either to Europe or to America or to different places. To give you some numbers, between 1882 and 1919, all the Jewish population that stayed northeast to Jaffa in what later on developed to be Tel Aviv were only 2,000 people. The game totally changes and becomes something totally different, okay, when the British decides, the biggest imperialist power in the world, decides to adopt the Zionist project and support it. Then everything gets totally different. So again, between 1882 and 1919, we had only 2,000 Jews northeast to Jaffa. Then with the British support in one decade, between 1919 and 1929, this population grew from 2,000 to 40,000, doubled 20 times in a decade. Okay, so numbers became totally different. The Zionist project became something totally different after the historical decision of the biggest imperialist power to adopt the Zionist project and support it. Then between 1929 and 1939, in this decade, Tel Aviv grew because of the Nazis coming to rule in Germany, from 40,000 to 160,000. Before the war of 1948, Tel Aviv had 200,000 Jewish people. Third of all the Jews in historical Palestine were living in Tel Aviv. And this city was developing north and east to Jaffa, and it became the most important, till today, it is the most important part of the Zionist project. From the other side, from the east and south, we had other Zionist colonies, like Rishon LeZion, Holon, and Bat Yam. The city of Jaffa, without war, found itself under siege. Okay? Before the war of 1948 and the violence. Of course, the Palestinians saw the danger of the Zionist project, and they were fighting and struggling against this from the beginning. With the powers that they have. Okay? They were not an imperialist power. With their small powers and energies, they were all the time fighting and trying to stop the project. And they did succeed in 1939 to get to something very big with the British, to change the Balfour Declaration and the decision to build a big Arab-Palestinian city in a decade. But what could they do? The whole world got into the Second World War, which reshuffled all the cards again, and the British changed again their minds, and we got to the UN, and a lot of complicated story. But what happened is that Jaffa, in the war of 1948, found itself a city without an army that can defend it, because Palestinians were under the colonial project and were not allowed to build their own armed forces. And they were surrounded with a lot of Zionist settlements all over. And the new settler project of the Zionists, they could build their own armed forces. They were supported by the British to have their armed forces. And the city found itself under bombings from north, mainly Tel Aviv, by the Etzel forces, and from east and south by the Haganah Zionist terrorist groups, and people did not know what to do. And for a few months, they were under siege, being bombed all the time. They were terrorized. People were really afraid, like what's happening now with our brothers in Syria, and they had to leave. Now, from 120,000 people, only 3,900 stayed in Jaffa. Now, those who stayed, not because the Zionists were generous enough to leave them there. Most of them, people that I did interviews with, stayed there by different chances. Someone who got to the port and there was no ships, or he got to the port and he was terrified from what he saw, so he did not want to go, or people that were injured and stayed in the hospital. So different chances, like what's happening also today, all over the Middle East. Now, those who stayed were considered by the new occupier, by Israel, by the Zionist forces, as part of the enemy. And here I want to tell you what happened between 1948 and 1950. In my point of view, the Palestinians who stayed in Jaffa, the Palestinians who survived the 1948, passed 3 Nakbas, not one. Okay, there is one which is very famous. I claim that they passed 3 catastrophes, one after the other, between 1948 and 1950. Now the first was the war. 1948, in a sudden, you find yourself in a war circumstance. You don't have an army to defend you. All the people that you knew are expelled. Why were they expelled? Because the new colonizer, his project is built on race. His main goal is to build a Jewish state. He did not come there to share your homeland. He came there to take your homeland. Okay? So, and his main goal is to do it as a Jewish state. How could they do a Jewish state with an Arab majority? This could not work. So they had 2 options. Either you do it the American way, you kill as much as you can Indians, and this happened in New Zealand, Australia, America, different places, or you expel the local community. All this discussion you hear between the historians, if the Palestinians were expelled or ran away, in my point of view, this is total nonsense discussion. There were no other options to do that. If your project is to build a Jewish state in Palestine, when they declared their project, they had only 5% of the population. It could not work without a serious catastrophe. So they expelled the local community. Those who stayed found themselves under a new regime. The new governor has different religion, different language, different culture, different tradition. He's very different in everything. And he deals with them as enemies inside their homeland. We became a minority in our homeland. It's not that we immigrated to Israel. Dr. Azmi Bshara used to say, Israel immigrated to us. We are the indigenous community. So they expelled the people. And then they dealt with us as enemies. And enemies you have to control. And for better control, they decided to gather all the people, wherever they have been, in the Manshia neighborhood, or in Jamal Basha Street, or in the Old City. And they gathered all of them by force, concentrated all of them only in one neighborhood. For better control, like I saw in Slovenia what the fascists did, surrounding you with a barbed wire. So it was not in all of Jaffa, the barbed wire. They decided to concentrate us only in one neighborhood. Then they surrounded us with the barbed wire under military control. The European Jews, by the way, that immigrated to Palestine, called our neighborhood a ghetto. We did not know the word ghetto before the Zionist occupation. Okay, we were introduced to ghettos by the Zionist project. So the people were concentrated in one neighborhood. Now I told you about 3 catastrophes. Now imagine, when you talk about people only in numbers, it's not good enough. Imagine you wake up one morning, God forbid, and all your human environment do not exist anymore. Your father, your mother, your classmate, your colleague, your neighbor, any human being you used to see his face before the war was not there after the war. Not just he is not there, because this is the world before iPhones and Facebook. You lost any connection to them. And if you just want to know if your mother got to Gaza or she was drowned in the sea, you, according to the new occupier, will be doing relationship to enemy state. Sorry. The new occupier decided that our natural environment, all of the Arab world, are enemy states. So they expelled our families to the Arab world, and we are not allowed to have any relationship to our families because the Arab states are enemy states. So you lost the people, you lost any connection to the people. This was much harder. And I remember in one of my interviews, one of the ladies told me, Abu Shhade, I want to tell you something little bit mean. Had I known that they have died, it would have been much easier for me. But the fact that they disappeared, and I don't know anything about them, was much harder. So you lost the people. Now, and then like in any big city, you lost the people, you lost the social functions. In a sudden, all the human capacities that were built before the war of 1948 were not in the city. In a sudden, you don't have lawyers or doctors or pharmacists or teachers or engineers or anything. You lost the people and you lost their social functions. Now, the newcomers came with a totally different culture. They did everything differently. So the people who stayed in Jaffa could not continue life the way they knew it before the war of 1948. And if someone wanted to build a new family, get married, do something, he could not do that in the way he could do it before the war, because the music band is not there anymore. Wedding court is not there anymore. The woman that makes the dresses is not there. Nothing could continue the way they knew life before the war. And the new occupier decided that we are different than all the people in the world. We do not have a national identity. We are not Palestinians. They decided, they reinvented us again as a new group, and they called us the Arabs of Israel. As if Israel has its own Arabs, okay? And according to their story, our history starts after the establishment of the Israeli state. Before that, we have no history. This is why till today, by the way, in Israel, we are not allowed to teach Palestinian history. Because we are not Palestinians from the state point of view. So when I'm telling you now that we are Palestinians, from the state point of view, I'm doing something very extreme. Now, this was the first Nakba. Okay, losing the war, all the big things, becoming a minority. The second Nakba was in 1949. Again, Dr. Bshara calls what happened in Palestine in 1948, the biggest armed robbery in the 20th century. Now, this is not just a political clash. When you think about it, the Zionists did not steal a big Palestinian bank or two real estate companies. They stole everything. The land was everything on the land. And imagine, you come today to Ljubljana, and you have everything. Apartments, furniture, cars, university, books, gardens, without the Slovenian people. And you want to decide that all this is yours. Now, modern states are legal states. To legalize their armed robbery, they made us a law. It's called the absentee law. And the absentee law says something very easy. Israel will send its people to count all the neglected property. Anyone who is not found inside his property while they are counting the property loses the property to the Israeli state. Now imagine, they expelled them. They expel the people, and then they tell them, if you are not inside your house, we take it. And the law did not say that the Palestinians who don't have the papers. Mr. Derhali has the papers still today. He can prove property. It's not a problem. Okay? The state says, and those who are not inside, but you expel them. The Palestinians are not that good magicians to be refugees in Gaza and sitting in their houses at the same time. So this is how they confiscated all the Palestinian property, but not only the refugees outside the homeland, same with the refugees inside the homeland. As I told you, people who came inside the ghetto had their property outside the ghetto. Like my family, we are from Tel Arish. It's 10 minutes by foot from where they put us in the Hajam. When they counted our property, my grandfather was inside the ghetto. So he lost the property. For those who stayed in Jaffa, this economic loss was much harder psychologically. Because people, it's Jaffa like Ljubljana, it's a small city. And if you go for a walk, you pass nearby your property. And people saw others enjoying their gardens and their oranges and their houses with no reason, they were there. So the second catastrophe was total economic crash of the Palestinian community who survived the war. The last thing, with this I'm going to summarize the whole thing, is what Israel calls coexistence. Okay? What is this coexistence? The Zionist project, because it's built on race, by the way, more than 90% of the population are living Arabs alone and Jews alone, and they don't mix or meet. There is less than 10% living in what Israel calls mixed cities, where Arabs and Jews are in the same place. Jaffa is one of these rare cases. Now, how did this thing happen? Okay, how did this coexistence happen? This came as a result of a war. We, the Palestinians, we lost a war. By the way, we were not the first or the last people on earth to lose a war. There were wars all across history. Everybody once lost a war. But the problem was that our enemy had a racial settler colonial project which is built on race. Why weren't Mr. Derhali or Mr. Saif or others allowed to come back? After the war, after the ceasefire, why were they not allowed to come back? Because from the Zionist point of view, they were born to the wrong race. If they were Jewish, they will come. Now, people were not allowed to come back. The indigenous community, the locals, were till today are not allowed to come back to their home. And the Zionist project in 1950 started a huge project, continuing till today, what they call demographic balance. What is this demographic balance? What do they mean by demographic balance? More Jews, less Arabs. This is the demographic balance. So the state started bringing huge amounts of Jewish immigration to Palestine after the war. Okay, in a very, very short time, very big numbers started coming. The state was still young and poor, didn't have time or money to build to all the newcomers. So what did they do? They gave our property to the new Jewish comers. So they divided Jaffa to different Jewish families. Then Jaffa was not enough. They started bringing them inside the Ajami neighborhood to live with us in the same neighborhood. Then they had more amounts, and the Ajami neighborhood was not enough. So if you had a 3 or 4 rooms apartment, they will divide your own apartment, giving one room to a Jewish Bulgarian family and the other room to a Jewish Romanian family, and keeping all the Arab Palestinian family in one room. Now, what makes this thing hard is that we had no historical compromise after the war. Okay, we did not compromise. So we were living with the enemy inside our apartment. I'm talking about the generation of my grandfather. And then the new Jewish comer, in order to become part of the group, became part of the Israeli military forces. So you can find your nice neighbor, you teach him to eat hummus full for breakfast because it's good and cheap. And then he gets dressed with his army suit and comes to tell you, well, Sami, keep an eye on the house, I'm going for a mission in Gaza. And you want to tell him, sir, whom are you going to kill in Gaza? Who's your enemy? You are going to kill my brother in Gaza. But you shut up, because if you say that, you become a refugee like your brother. But you are living with the enemy inside the same apartment. To summarize the whole thing, the 3 catastrophes happening in a very, very short time, between 1948, 1950, 51, made a huge collective trauma to the local Palestinians who survived the war after 1948 in the city of Jaffa. It was so painful that the vast majority of the men population became under clinical depression. The society became dysfunctional. To deal with all this pain, people started becoming drug addicts. At that time they were eating opium, or they became alcoholic, or they started dealing with crime. In a very, very short time, the most important Palestinian city, the city of Jaffa, that according to its city planner in 1946, the new master plan was that Jaffa should host the Arab Olympic Games of the whole Arab world. 1946. It was transferred into a small, retarded, criminal, poor neighborhood called the Ajami neighborhood. Now in 1950, there was an official decision to annex the city of Jaffa to the big new metropolitan city of Tel Aviv, becoming one big city. Tel Aviv, Jaffa. So what started at the end of the 19th century as the Jewish neighborhood of the big Arab metropolitan city of Jaffa, as a result of the 1948 war, was a big city named Tel Aviv that had its own small Arab neighborhood called Jaffa. Okay. This is why I think that the story of Jaffa and Tel Aviv and the relationship between them is a microcosm of the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And thank you.
Thank you, Sami. Now we will have Daniel Monterescu, who is professor of urban anthropology at the Central European University in Budapest, born in Jaffa. And he has published extensively on ethnic relations and urban space in binational or mixed cities. And I think it's from that point of view that you're going to speak today.
Yes. So, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to see Sami and Julius and others again in this Central European space. I would like to talk to you today about perhaps some hopeful perspective, where Sami has described the reasons and the profile of the Nakba and its implications. I would like to point to a few ways where we perhaps can overcome this depression and think of creative ways to mobilize society. And I will indeed historically and sociologically point to... Does it work?
Yes.
Yeah. I will point to the historical emergence of an activist class, of a middle class, of political agency in Jaffa, in this urban context. Most of what I will talk today is based on my book on Jaffa, which came out recently. And let me start with the end. The end is the imagination, the possibility to imagine not only the return to Jaffa, but also the marriage between a discourse of urban rights and a discourse of national rights. And this is, paradoxically, we see here that this was represented in a slogan written in Hebrew by a Jewish activist. So I think we can also see here potential for interesting coalitions between Jewish and Palestinian activists in Jaffa. So we will get back to this picture, which I think can tell us a lot about the potential coalitions in the struggling city of Jaffa. This picture is from the 2011 demonstrations after the Arab Spring revolts. The Palestinian story of Jaffa is that of tragedy, of loss, but it's also a story of encounter and ambivalence. And I think one of the best illustrations of that is Mahmoud Darwish's poem in Under Siege, where he writes, "Me or him, thus begins the war, but it ends with an awkward encounter, me and him. Liqa haraj." Right? So there's something profoundly intimate about the act of war, about the act of violence, and this intimacy remains part of your life when you live in an ongoing state of Nakba, in an ongoing state of siege, as is the case of Jaffa. So what kind of a life is it? What kind of politics can we make out of this life? Edward Said elsewhere described the Palestinian and Israeli conflict in very poetic Hegelian terms. And he writes, when you think about Jew and Palestinian not separately, but as part of a symphony, there's something imposing about it, very rich, also very tragic, very desperate history of extremes, opposites in the Hegelian sense. So what we are faced with is a kind of sublime grandeur of a series of tragedies, of sacrifices, of pain. There is an element of romanticization here by Said of the Palestinian Nakba, but there's also an element of truth, in the sense that the Palestinian Nakba, the Palestinian tragedy, opens in front of us what it means to be human, what it means to be the ultimate victim, but also what it means to overcome such victimhood, and what it means to deal with the historical responsibility of being part of such colonial apparatus. And this is what I will try to show is the ongoing reality in Jaffa. What we see here is one of many examples you can find in the city of Jaffa about these violence of intimacy, these territorial struggles about who is entitled to claim the city. So on the one hand, we see the street name named after Natan Pants, who was not only a famous football player, but also a soldier in the 1948 war who died during that war. And on the other hand, we have a slogan posted by the Islamic movement calling to redeem yourself and to be mindful, seek forgiveness from God, right? We have a lot of these cases where symbolic claims over the city are faced and are struggling to define the space. This is an example in the Jebeliya Mosque of another case of ambivalent claim, but this time by a mixed couple, by Fuad, who is a Palestinian man, and Osnat, who is a Jewish woman, who want to say there is a way to go beyond the logic of territorial nationalism. And of course, this is a gentrified neighborhood, so you have the whole paradox of Palestinian community in Jaffa, a gentrified neighborhood, a mosque, and the Jewish-Arab impossible love story, right? Of course, days afterwards, the graffiti was deleted, and all what that remained were 3 stains on the wall, which is also an impossibility for both the Palestinian and the Jewish national projects, right? To imagine its own transgression. The struggle over the identity of the city still goes on. It is not just the Palestinian Jaffa and the Jewish Jaffa, but these are also interacting in urban space. And this is an example of a Jewish graffiti saying in a very ambivalent way, Jaffa is the Jewish city too. Right? Notice that there is the Star of David, and there's even a swastika in the middle of the Star of David. And what is interesting here is that, what do you think? Is it a statement of inclusion or exclusion? Is it a statement about Jaffa being a shared city, or is it a statement about Jaffa being only a Jewish city?
Should be inclusion.
Inclusion? Perhaps. I mean, it's definitely confusing, right? First it says Jaffa rather than Jaffa, the Arabic, Jaffa, the Hebrew, or Jaffa, the English. It is written in English that no one really speaks in Jaffa, right? It's either Arabic or Hebrew. And it says something about the Jewish city too. So the question is whether, is it also a Jewish city and an Arab city? Or is it the Jewish city too? Like other Jewish cities, it is a Jewish city. And indeed, 2 years later when I went back, the graffiti looked like that. And this is a very interesting way of erasing ambivalence, erasing any form of confusion. And now it is clear, Jaffa is the Jewish city, full stop, right? And whether the same person did the changes or not, what remains the main conclusion is that even the identity and the claim for the city remain ongoing in struggle, right? So there's a struggle not only over space, material space, but over the idea of the city. And we will see later how the figure of the orange plays an important part in it. Okay, so My message is double. We are facing with a tragic history, but as we can see from this demographic chart, we are also facing great hope. You have a demographic representation of the ratio between Palestinian and Jewish demographics in different cities. And what we see is like cities that like Tiberias, which was... there's a laser. Which one is the laser?
Don't ask me.
All right. Perhaps it's not. No. All right. So you can see Tiberias here. Tabaria. So this is Tiberias, which was by the way, one of the most successful cities in terms of Arab-Jewish relations between 1948. The Jewish inhabitants were speaking Arabic, they were Mizrahi Jews, they were not Ashkenazi Jews. They had a long history of coexistence, of pragmatic coexistence, but Tiberias was also one of the cases of complete ethnic cleansing. No Arabs left in the city after 1948. What we call the ethnically mixed cities, Mudul Mukhtalata or Arim or Ravot, today, like Haifa, Jaffa, and Lidda, have very interesting stories. But the most interesting of it is the fact that you can see here. No, sorry. You can see here, while the ratio between Jews and Arabs were growing in favor of Jews, and 1948 being the catastrophe where most of the Arab population was expelled, you have a growth, you have a demographic revival of the Palestinian community in some of these cities. And this is a truly remarkable phenomenon that with an important conclusion. That we can see, by the way, if we look at the Jewish history in Europe, that even histories of almost extermination can turn, and minority communities can grow and revive and reconstruct themselves. And I hope that this is the story of Jaffa, and at least in numbers, this is what we see, that Palestinian presence in Israel is gradually not only growing in numbers, but also growing sociologically and culturally in terms of collective identity. We don't have much time to discuss the whole history of these cities, but this is just an example of how we can think historically about cities like Jaffa. And we have a trajectory, an historical trajectory from the Ottoman sectarian, Ottoman pre-capitalist system of the 16th to the 19th century to the present. The important historical crossroads that Sami mentioned are the emergence of a mercantile city in the 19th century and the gradual nationalization and politicization of these cities, especially after the Balfour Declaration and in the 30s and 40s. The aftermath of the war, these cities, and Jaffa is not alone in here, became war zones, right? And you can see pictures outside how devastating the war was. And what we are facing today is a form of urban colonization. We have colonized towns with small but important Palestinian minority. So these are not really mixed towns. These are Jewish towns with a Palestinian minority. And each city from Haifa to Lidda differs in the history, in the local history of the relations between the Palestinians and the establishment, the Palestinian and the Jewish members, and the relations between the Jews and the city and their Palestinian residents. So here we see a few examples of the history of these cities and how they changed in history. We don't have time to that, but we can come back to that if you want. The interesting thing is that while Jaffa is one of the oldest cities, you have also new cities that became ethnically mixed, like Natzat Eilit and Chatzor Glilit and Carmiel. Cities that were supposed to be settled, exclusively Jewish settlements, but now, ironically, have been Palestinized, right? Have been, we can also almost say gentrified by Palestinians. So Carmiel and Upper Nazareth, we will have the middle class of Palestinians who don't want to remain in Nazareth. So they are moving to, in a form of an interesting historical irony, to the Jewish settlement. And that's kind of, it's an interesting turn. Also, the very idea of what is an ethnically mixed town has its own history, but we won't get into that. What we have today is what one of the Palestinian elderly in Jaffa said, a form of stranger relations, right? Jaffa is, as Sami said, was known to be al-Gharib, was known to be one of the cosmopolitan cities in the region accepting labor migrants, right? From Haran to Syria to Egypt, from all over. Even Bukhara, right? There's even one Bukhari in Jaffa. So there is a real cosmopolitan potential here. But as this Palestinian elderly says, al-Gharib, Jaffa is the mother of the stranger. It welcomes him and feeds him while neglects its own son and leaves them to starve. So there is a tragic complex in the act in the fact of a city being open and accepting strangers, in the fact that this comes at the expense of its own sons, of its own native residents. And in many ways, this is one of the tragedies of Jaffa, that it kept its openness, but this became a weakness today. You have collaborators, collaborators coming from the West Bank and Gaza and destroying the social fabric from within. And you have, of course, Jewish gentrifiers coming and also, of course, threatening the cohesion of Palestinian society. What we are faced here, and this is an example from Belfast, what we are faced with now is the fact that abnormality became normal, right? And it reminds me of Belfast because it is exactly what is happening. If the abnormality, this Protestant fighter, if the abnormality lasts long enough, the abnormality itself becomes normal, right? So we are living in not only what Mahmoud Darwish called the state of siege, but we're also living in a state of exception. And this state of exception becomes banalized, becomes the norm. And this is a danger, not only to our psychological integrity, but also to our life and culture. Because once you live in abnormal situations, you start thinking in abnormal ways, right? So you think about your family, about your children, about your future, about your community, in ways that are eventually detrimental to all of you. We talked yesterday about how dangerous the other is. And indeed, you know, Jean-Paul Sartre finishes his play, Huis Clos, with the statement, l'enfer c'est les autres, hell is the other, right? And indeed for the national project, for the nationalist project, hell is the other. And what we see here is the graffiti that was left behind a Jewish Arab school in Jerusalem. And after they burned the school, this is what they left behind. In Hebrew it says, no coexistence with cancer. This is the general state of affairs in Israel, where the sense of the other, it can be the Palestinian other, but it can be also the Sudanese other or the Eritrean other coming to work, right? The refugee other. All of them are seen as a form of cancer. And cities like Jaffa, beyond the task, the historical task of reconstituting Palestinian presence, have a more universal function. And this is to show the world and show ourselves that we can live with otherness, that Palestinians and Israelis can live together and can create something, a way of life that goes beyond the either or, black and white way of life. Okay, so what are we dealing with Jaffa? When we are trying to talk about, in terms of sociology or history, we have a few models. We can talk about the colonial city, we can talk about the divided city, we can talk about the dual city. But we need to find more dynamic, more careful ways of describing the situation in Jaffa, right? Another way is to talk about what geographer Ball called scenarios. What kind of an urban scenario are we dealing with? Is it a form of cleansing or polarization or segmentation? All of these concepts can help us think through the case of Jaffa as a reviving Palestinian city. What I would like to stress today is the fact that there is a strong element of ambivalence. There's a strong element of confusion, both on the Palestinian and on the Israeli side. And this is an historical example from 1949, a guide written and given to the Jewish immigrants. And what is interesting here is how the Arab city is described. It is described as, if you see in line number 4, this new old Jewish city is like a sealed book, not only for most Israelis living elsewhere, but also for those living in nearby Jaffa. Jaffa has already become an Israeli city, but not yet a Hebrew city. This is not the normal process of building a new city. Here the empty shell, the houses were ready-made. What was left to be done was to bring this ghost town back to life. Materially and externally, Hebrew Jaffa is nothing but the legacy of Arab Jaffa prior to May 48. So even immediately after the war, in the heyday of the colonizing project, what we have is a strong presence of the Arabness of Jaffa. And this ambivalence still remains. It still remains even when you talk to the gentrifiers, who are a bit hesitant whether they can live in Ajami or not. Like when you talk to architects like Sharon Rothbard, like a famous architect, he said that I don't plan in Jaffa, right? There is an element of danger which is associated with the city. Right? This is a demographic or an urban map of Jaffa to show what happened in the city since 1948. Right? So of course the important event is the exodus of the Palestinian population in 1948. But then came a series of historical events that are important if we want to understand the city. First is the influx of Jewish immigrants after the war. We're talking about, if we had about 4,000 Palestinians left, we're talking about, in matter of weeks and months, the influx of 40 to 50,000 Jewish immigrants, many of them from Bulgaria. So there's a beautiful book called From Sofia to Jaffa, showing how the entire Jewish community of Sofia moved and settled into Jaffa. And what we have in the 50s is a surreal situation where people on the street speak Bulgarian and Romanian and Moroccan Arabic. And the city becomes a form of a proletarian transit camp. Completely different from what it was before, but still a city, still a living city, right? And this was the situation in the early decades of the state, where the city was completely devastated from the sociological perspective. It lacked its middle class, it lacked its Palestinian elite, and it had a new form of population, right? We had the houses remained, except for Manshia, which was destroyed, the old city which was half destroyed, and some of Ajami. Most of the infrastructure was there, in bad condition, what was there, and different people were coming to use it, right? So like in Kanafani, I don't know if you know Ghassan Kanafani's story, where someone else comes to live in your house, and we still have, as you all know, Palestinians coming back to see their houses, and we still have Jews living in these houses, wondering what will happen one day when the Palestinian owner will come to ask for their property, right? And this takes us back to the question of the right of return. The third important urban stage is the fact that the idea of urban modernization held strong in the 1950s and 60s, and in the master plan of 1954 you see already a concrete plan to destroy Jaffa and create instead a modern city. What we consider today to be architectural values, the Arab house, the special Italian tiles, the whole Jaffa style, what is called today the Jaffa style, was deemed in the 50s and 60s as slums to be eliminated. And this is why much of Ajami and Jabaliyya was destroyed. And this is why we see the landfill, Tamam, what we call the Tamam, the landfill in Jaffa, the park that was basically built on the debris, on the destroyed houses that were pushed to the sea, right? This is the result of this modernization urban plan in the 50s and the 60s, and this also created a powerful demographic change in the city because Jews were encouraged to leave Jaffa and resettle in surrounding neighborhoods and cities. And you have neighborhoods like Yafo Daled and Yafo Gimel and Rishon and Bat Yam, where Jews lived in projects, socialist projects, just like the ones you see here. And paradoxically, this created the opposite effect. Instead of segregating Palestinians, who were not, of course, considered to be part of this upscaling movement, this basically transformed the Palestinians from a small minority. So, for example, in 1962, in the Ajami neighborhood, there were 20,000 Jews and like 4,000 Palestinians. So there were a small minority within a large Jewish majority in the neighborhood. When the Jews left in the 60s and the 70s, suddenly the Palestinians found themselves again, we can say. They were able to redefine their collective identity because they were left behind. So the modernization plan, which was meant to destroy the Palestinian city, paradoxically created the possibility for a Palestinian political community. And this is why a decade later, in 1978 and 79, we see the emergence of the first generation of the political activists in Jaffa with Anda Mazawi and Gabi Abed and Siksik and others. Right? These are the first generation of Palestinians who already born in Israel, studied in Israel or Israeli or church schools, gradually defined their collective identity in national and ethnic political terms. And this was possible, I argue, paradoxically because they were left behind. Because otherwise, if they remained a small minority within an inhabited Jewish district, it wouldn't be possible. Right? They had to be segregated. It's like the African Americans in the U.S. ghetto. They had to be segregated to create an effective political identity. How much time do I have?
Oof, gone.
All right. What we see today is gentrification. Gentrification is about commodification of space. It's about turning urban space into a commodity to be sold and consumed. So we are moving into the consumption of space, and this turns all that is in Jaffa into a real estate potential. And this is why the language of the oranges, for example, changed from a national symbol to a logo. And we see today oranges in Jaffa, but they are part of the capitalist discourse of marketing. The oranges that we see in Jaffa, apart from the local Palestinian discourse, have no other function but to market the city as a real estate for investment. And indeed, as you know, the real estate prices in the city changed dramatically, tenfolds and 20folds in the city in the last decades. Sociologically, we're basically dealing with a very complicated sociological structure. The Palestinian community that we call is actually not really a community. It is an ensemble, an assemblage of sub-communities divided along class and along religion. And the Palestinian project is, of course, to bring them together. And the Israeli attempt is, of course, to bring them apart, right? But when we talk about the Palestinian community, this is already an ideological statement. From the sociological perspective, we need to see where are the challenges and what can be done about it. The same holds for the Jewish community. There is no Jewish community. There are different communities along ethnic and class and different communal histories. We can talk at least about 3 Jewish groups. One is the old, what we can call the veteran Jews, like my family, who came from Romania in the early 50s and settled in Manchuria before Manchuria was completely destroyed, or like the Bulgarians, or like some of the Moroccans and Tunisians. Then are the new Jewish gentrifiers who came in the 80s and the 90s. And these people, by the way, the Jewish veteran community is completely disintegrated. The second generation, my generation, left, and there is no continuity. There is no sense of being a Jewish Jaffan. What we have today is 2 newcomers. One is the gentrifiers, who came in the 80s and the 90s, looking for this Oriental charm, and in some cases also for coexisting with Arabs. Right? These are not right-wing radicals. Many of them, there is also a political potential there. And they are in search of an identity. They have a relatively strong network, community, and they are in search of what defines them. And that's why some of the questions that bother them is where to send our kids to school, whether we send them to schools outside of Jaffa or inside of Jaffa, etc. And the new player is what we can call the settlers, the settler networks. And we have increasingly penetration of settlers. And what we are witnessing is a very interesting process where the political front of settlers is moving from the West Bank and Gaza to Israel cities. And mixed cities like Ramle, Lid, Jaffa are becoming the new frontier of the settlement project. And this is something that I don't see anyone dealing with it seriously. Because these people are motivated, they have strong ideologies, they have resources, and they manage one by one to purchase assets. In Jaffa, for example, in the Talat al-Suq, there was a big defeat for the grassroots movement in Jaffa, which failed to protect one of the social centers of the city, which was the market, in the heart of Ajami, and the land was bought by a settler, nationalist, Jewish, exclusively Jewish collective. Right? So these things are happening, and we need to also to understand that the city, the same as that the city changed with the arrival of the Bulgarian in the 50s, it will change with the arrival of the settlers in the first decade of the 21st century. Okay, just a few pictures to give you a sense. This is the port, of course. This is the mapping of some 200 evacuation orders given to Palestinians in Ajami. And it's no coincidence that these are all gentrified hotspots. Right? So there is a correspondence between the evacuation orders for technical reasons and the fact that there is an ongoing gentrification project in the west of Jaffa. Okay, this is a part of a graffiti, Jaffa Tabki, Diur Yafo, Jaffa is crying, housing for the Arabs of Jaffa, which shows that there is often in these cities a potential for binational mobilization, for joint Jewish and Arab struggle, because Arabs alone would not be, I mean, we saw that in South Africa. Blacks alone were not able to struggle, not to struggle, but eventually to win against apartheid. They had to have coalitions within the white community, and the same is here. We can see in the history of electoral, of municipal politics, Palestinians alone do not have the numbers and do not have the political will to win this struggle. They have to create coalitions with Jewish progressive forces. This is a very interesting example of the gated community, and the sign says "Liknot or lo liot," to buy or not to be, which is almost a Shakespearean slogan for predatory gentrification or capitalism, right? You are either you buy or you don't exist, and I think this is precisely the dilemma of the Palestinian community in Jaffa. A few examples. This is from the immediately. This is 2001. The Dolphinarium suicide bombing, if you remember the suicide attack, and immediately after the suicide attack in a discotheque just across the street, Jewish youngsters attacked the Hassan Bek Mosque. So there is kind of there was an interesting triangle between the Jews, the discourse among these demonstrators was that the Palestinian suicide bomber came to slept in Jaffa, prayed in the mosque, and then went to commit the suicide bombing. And this is how they justified. I know because I was there and I was researching this, and this is how they justified them attacking the Hassan Bek Mosque. And indeed, if people were trapped inside, it was a very dangerous story. But these things are part of the history of the place. This is a graffiti on the Yefet Street showing the junkie scene. It is also, as Sami mentioned, it's part of the anomie, the social anomie, the social disintegration of the city, not just drugs, but also general violence, criminal violence. This is the Kazakhane graveyard where Ibrahim Abulohod is buried, and this is a picture by artist Sami Bukhari from the Bukhari migration. And what is interesting here is that he thinks of the city not as a living city, but as a zombie city. And if you look at the city and the graveyard, they look a bit similar when you look at them from afar, right? And they are all kind of disintegrating into the sea from Sami's perspective. Another artistic representation by this photographer is this wild boar. Some men in Jaffa like to hunt wild boars. It's not halal, but they do. And this is an interesting example because this boar looks like a very almost smiling boar, only that his head is served on a plate. And for Sami Bukhari, this is a metaphor for Jaffa, looking as a zombie city, looking alive, but in fact, it is dead. Another example of Ajami, you can see first the spaces where houses were demolished, and then you can see in the background all the Jewish neighborhoods that surround the city and give it a sense of closure. These are the kind of socialist houses of the 50s, and these are the new villas and construction from the 1990s. You can see all the yellow signs are for sale. So Jews want to move out. And who's moving in? Palestinians are moving into Jewish neighborhoods. So you have also that, right? You have Jews coming into Palestinian neighborhoods with gentrification, and then Palestinians moving into Jewish neighborhoods. So you have almost like a vicious circle of urban demography, where Jews move into Palestinian spaces and Palestinians move into Jewish spaces. Oops, no. Okay, so you can see here example of other cases of gentrification. This is the Andromeda gated community in its effects, and this is in the 2011, the March of the Million, after the the Arab Spring events in Egypt. Jaffa was also part of this movement, and this is the camp, the first day of the camp, and the attempt to organize the collective, to organize Palestinians for social justice, for social housing, for coalitions with other neighborhoods like the Atikva, which is the Mizrahi, usually right-wing neighborhoods, for defending the periphery. And you can see here the same slogan about the right of return. And even in more radical terms, like democracy for everyone from the Jordan to the river to the sea. And in the end, this collapsed and we were left with Hamdallah saying here, Ana b'intizar bayt wa huwa kaman. And this is a movement that Sami was a very important leader of. And in the end, it remained a sad example of how a community can rise up and make radical demands like this one, but in the end how some of these struggles disintegrate. So I think we're faced with the double message of a huge potential for radical activism, like to imagine an act for the right of return to all Jaffa. It's not just the right of return, it's the right of return to the city. Right, so these are two together, while fighting for some form of binational coalition.